It was supposed to be Shanice Thacker's day to shine. She had an important job interview, was dressed for success and ready to knock it out of the ballpark as she drove over. But in that very moment, fate threw her a curveball. Blue lights began flashing in her rearview mirror. And what happened after the police officer approached her left her utterly stunned. When Richmond, Virginia native Shanice Thacker woke up on the morning of September 1st, 2017, she had high hopes for what was to come. She started her day feeling motivated. The young mom had a job interview scheduled for that day, and now more than ever, she needed to be in tip-top shape. Naturally, Shanice wanted to impress her interviewer. That meant slipping into her best business casual outfit, carefully doing her makeup, and knowing the finer aspects of the job she was interviewing for. She was feeling lucky as she walked out of her front door. Yet, as it would turn out, luck had something quite different in mind. Shanice got into her car and pulled out of her driveway. By doing so, she immediately made herself a target to any cop itching to give a ticket. She didn't know it at this time, but as she stopped at stop signs and red lights and braked to make turns, she was actually putting a lot of people in danger. Shanice had a broken brake light. This meant that if any sudden stops were needed while on the highway, she might get smashed from behind. That said, Shanice had no idea her brake light was out. If anything, she actually thought they were working fine. And she had a good reason to think that. Only about a month prior to the day of her job interview, Shanice had checked her car into the local Firestone, where she had been urged to get her lights worked on. They then tried to charge her a startling $600 for a wiring test. She declined, asked for her car back, and then went on her way. While there's no concrete proof, it's definitely possible that one of these Firestone mechanics didn't like her rejecting their pricey wiring test and decided to fool around with the car's lights. Fast forward 1 month, and while Shanice was on her way to that job interview, suddenly she saw something alarming in her rearview mirror. When going out for a job interview, knowing the job and dressing to impress just isn't enough. You need to appear confident and need to sport some good vibes. Shanice's good vibes and confidence were at serious risk of being washed away as she saw red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. That hopeful Virginia morning now took a turn for the worst for Shanice. If she didn't play her cards right, she knew that she might not make it to the job interview at all. She pulled over to the side. The cop slowly approached the car and Shanice quickly reached for something in her glove compartment. Shanice couldn't have been pulled over at a more urgent time. Being late to an interview is definitely a telling sign of what could be expected from a possible hire, and a penchant for being tardy definitely wasn't one of her personality traits. Shanice's mood immediately took a nosedive. Being in a rush to get to her job interview, Shanice didn't want to waste any time arguing with a police officer. She immediately opened her glove compartment and reached for her registration. However, the cop didn't care about her registration. He wanted to get straight to the point. And it was at that point that Officer Jenkins did something shocking. 9 times out of 10, if you have a broken brake light, no sub-story is going to faze a cop. He'll see the damage as your responsibility, collect your license and registration, and write you a huge ticket. At the very least, he might write you out a fix-it ticket and be on his merry way. One could only assume that this police officer's behavior would be no different. He immediately told Shanice to put her license and registration away and informed her that she had been driving with 2 broken headlights. The information bomb that he dropped on her was a shock to her system. What he'd do then was utterly unexpected. Shanice began telling the officer her story about being overcharged by Firestone and recently getting the lights fixed. Officer Jenkins raised an eyebrow and asked her to pop the trunk of her vehicle. We can only imagine the panic that she felt when being asked that question. She didn't want to end up on the news and had nothing to hide, so she stayed calm and opened up the trunk for the police officer. As he began circling the vehicle, she was likely wondering if she'd ever make it to the job interview. Shanice stepped out of the vehicle and watched the cop tinker with her truck. What he was doing back there was definitely not something out of the police officer's job manual. Out of nowhere, the police officer went into full-on mechanic mode and began tinkering with her brake lights. He gave them a good look over and even tapped them a few times. Unfortunately, the lights did not turn on. Either her car was too old and decrepit, or the mechanics at Firestone had ripped her off. The officer lifted himself out of the trunk and then asked Shinice to pop the hood. He then proceeded to check the relay box. Shinice all the while looked on in disbelief. She recalled during an interview with Fox, "He could have easily given me a ticket." But Officer Jenkins stepped out of the officer role and into the mechanic role to make sure I was straight. Despite the officer's good deed, would she make it to the interview? In terms of the broken brake light, nothing much beyond the officer's touching response had been reported on. If Officer Jenkins managed to fix the brake lights in the end remains yet to be told. But it's safe to assume that Shinice was able to make things right again with her vehicle. As for the job interview, she more than likely aced it. In 2017, Shinice began working at the University of Phoenix as a correctional support person. While things might have looked dim earlier that morning, it was thanks to a cop with a different approach that her day picked up. However, she didn't easily forget what the police officer had did for her. She would later pay a little tribute to him. Officer Jenkins' good deed stuck with Shinice throughout the whole day, and when she got home, she had to let the world know how she felt. Naturally, she took her gratitude to social media and left a very touching post. It surely isn't every day that a cop goes the extra mile for someone quite like that. So with suspense in mind, Shinice told her whole story. She built it up slowly, making many people suspect that when those blue and red lights began flashing, she was in big trouble. However, when everyone finished reading her post, they knew what a good man Officer Jenkins was. Many people responded, but one post in particular really turned heads. Shinice's grateful post instantly skyrocketed in terms of shares and comments. People were completely taken by the officer's compassionate approach. With that said, there was one comment that Shinice was really touched by. Amidst the deluge of comments, the Henrico County Police Department decided to chime in and thank Shinice. The police station responded on Facebook by saying, "Thank you, Shinice Thacker, for sharing this about one of our officers. We are so proud of our officers, especially when we see citizens sharing things like this. Above and beyond the call of duty, Officer Jenkins. Service to our community is what it's all about." This back and forth would end up taking their mild story to the next level. These days, headlines featuring police officers generally have a far darker story behind them. But this act of kindness made Officer Jenkins stand out like a diamond in the rough. The internet ran with the story and it soon became a viral sensation. Even big news networks like Fox and NBC featured this simple tale of generosity. As for Officer Jenkins, he is still doing his job of protecting and serving the good citizens of Henrico County, Virginia. And as for the future, the people can only hope that this officer's compassion and kindness is infectious to other officers on the police force. Did you like this story? Check out our channel for more.